Hi, today I'm going to talk about 3 different outcomes you can acquire while doing script brush lettering. And as you see here, I'm going to be talking about these 3 projects. All of them have been done with the exact same tool, starting with. So I'm going to talk about that. I started using the same tool, but the outcomes are really different. So the brush that I started working with, it's called Pentel Touch, as you can see here. Sometimes it's called Pentel Fudge. Sometimes you can also find it as a Pentel Sign Brush. Okay, so these 3 hand sketches have been done with the same tool, but then I'm going to talk to you about 3 different outcomes coming from the first and the same tool, which is a brush pen. So let's go into one by one, and I'll be showing my process and what the pieces look like in the end. So the first one I'm going to be talking about is this one, called Finding Your Inner Compass. I'm going to zoom in and I'm going to talk about the foundations of my knowledge in Copperplate calligraphy to create all these lettering pieces. So when I have to start working on a piece like that, I normally go back to the same ratio and the same knowledge that I have for writing Copperplate. That means a few things. So the first thing is that you see there is a very strong angle, a slant, and it's 55 degrees. So all my writing is going to be following the same slant. The second thing is that I'm going to be using this ratio of 2, 1, 2. And what it means is, as you can see in here, that my X height corresponds to 1 unit, and everything is going to be inside this 1 unit, inside the X height. Then all my ascenders, my long ascenders at least, let's go out. In this case, I only have 1 ascender, which is letter D. And letter D, let's go back in. Following Copperplate proportions, letter D is a short ascender, so it's only going to go to the first line above. So I'm sitting in this area of the short ascender. Now for my capitals are going to be following my long ascender area. So I'm using 2 units for the height of my capitals. Now, in this case, I have 1 descender that you can see in here. So this letter G is going to follow the second line below and corresponds to the long descender area. Now, all these letter forms have been creating following the guidelines of Copperplate. So as you can see in here, once the message has been written, and I normally use a regular ballpoint pen. So in here, for example, I was starting to add swashes around it. But if I have to start writing the message first, which is what I've done in here, I will start following my letter forms. All of them are going to be following the same angle of 45 degrees. And because of Copperplate, I already know a lot of things about the shapes of these letter forms and how the ovals should follow also the 55-degree angle, and what is happening about inside the letter forms, also what happens on the outskirts. So a lot of this information, I obtained that by studying Copperplate. Like what I'm doing at the moment is literally, I'm just doing a monoline following exactly the same shapes. So I will look at what I'm creating in the inside, and I'm looking at what I'm creating, the space I'm creating on the outside, so between the letter forms. I study first the sentence I need to create, and as you can see in here, I'm starting then to picture how can I start adding variation. So I'm currently studying with John Stevens, and he talks about unity within variety or variety within unity. And I find it very, very good way to explain things, because what I'm doing in here is, first of all, I'm creating monoline, so no contrast letter forms, and making sure that the letters inside are all the same width. And I'm making sure the spaces between my letters are also the same or very similar width as the space inside, okay? So what I'm referring in here is that the main difference between calligraphy and lettering is that when we do calligraphy, we need to make sure that every single letter of the alphabet from A to Z or Z have exactly the same DNA, which is what I'm starting to do in here. I'm making sure that all my letter forms follow the same width, and that width also informs the space between my letters. When I create the next word, which is inner, I will follow the 55-degree, and I will go down, create the inside of my capital I, and then again, I will start following the shapes of my letters exactly the same as when I'm doing Copperplate. And making sure that all these letters follow the same width, and the space in between them is also the same amount. Now, the first part is writing everything we need to do. So for calligraphy, everything needs to share the same DNA, because we need to make sure, same as in typography, every single combination of letters is going to work. Well, the difference with lettering is that we only need to worry about the letters we need to design. So in this case, I only need to worry about 4 words. And also the second thing is that I want to attract as much attention as possible. So that means I'm going to create an image out of words, and I'm going to add as much personality as possible in each word so that I attract attention. So in here, you can see that I'm starting to wonder if I want to create this letter Y in a different shape. I also wonder, how can I extend the shape of this R and the shape of this N? How can I emphasize every word, which has a lot more variety and a lot more energy? This is what happens if I use a pointed flexible pen or my brush pen. In both cases, it's the same. So when I'm using this type of pens, same as a pointed nib, everything is going to be high contrast, because I'm making sure that the up stroke is as thin as possible and the down stroke is as thick as possible. So I'm starting to obtain this high contrast in here. So this is the very first step with my script brush lettering pieces. Now this looks quite static, and what I want to create is more dynamism, and I want to create a word, an image out of this sentence. So I'm gonna start moving things. Now, coming from here, my next decision is that I'm going to start actually moving this baseline. So the first decision I'm taking in here is that actually I'm not working anymore in an horizontal baseline. I decided to create the baseline going upwards. And what this does is makes everything more dynamic. So I always create this grid, which is, I decided the angle of the baseline, and also I decided my slant, which now is not 55 degrees, might be a different slant, but I always create this guide. So what I'm making sure in here, I don't know exactly what the degree of the slant of the baseline is. I just do it by eye. So what I make sure is that the baseline is parallel to each other. So I have 3 words, 3 lines, and these 3 lines are parallel. And the second thing I'm making sure is that the distance between my baselines are the same. So in here, the X high also, it's going to be the same between all of them. Now, the next step I'm doing is I'm deciding if this is the layout that I want to work with, which is one word at the top, two in the middle, and one word at the bottom. I'm going to start filling all these spaces by creating extensions of every letter form, so that I'm sort of filling in the spaces of every letter form to make sure that the whole thing, it's a composition. Everything is tied together. I'm extending the letter forms. I'm amplifying some of the letters, like letter S in here. I'm making ligatures, as I'm doing in here, by combining the P with the S. Up to here, I'm only working in monoline. So this is a pencil drawing. And once I have this, it's strong enough and close enough for me to start working again with the brush pen and to start adding again contrast. So the next step I do is I trace my pencil drawing with a light box, and then I'm using the brush pen. I'm following exactly the pencil sketch that I created, and now I'm adding thin and thicks to see how the composition works. Now, once I'm in here in this section, I have three options, and this is the three options I'm going to show you today. So once I have this hand lettering ready, this sketch ready, now I'm going to take three types of decisions. Decision number, well, actually four. Like the first one is actually exactly what I have in here. I can use exactly what I have, which is an original. I can do it and redo it and redo it again till it's completely polished, like this example in here. Okay. This example is slightly bigger, but follows the same sort of characteristics that I'm doing at the moment. Okay, so I trace this sketch again, and I polish again until I'm really happy with. So this one will be the first final piece, which is a hand lettering piece done exactly as an original, and then you can scan that and use it as an image. Option two, I can scan this version, this sketch, and create a bitmap. Yes, you can do it by scanning exactly the piece that you have, or you can create a bitmap by using Procreate. So what I'm going to show you now is the result of using Procreate and redoing the exact same piece that I use in here with an analog brush, but this time using a digital brush. So I'm going to bring across my iPad, and I'm going to show you. All right. So that's the first outcome, digital outcome. So in here, what you see is exactly a photograph of my brush sketch. Now I went inside these layers and I started to use a digital brush, and I went over exactly my scan, and you can see here the layer underneath and the layer on top. Now I hide the scan and I have this. It looks really, really similar to the hand lettering piece I just did. Once I have this version done, now I decided that I wanted a background. So I normally work in vector format a lot. So I used Illustrator and I created a really strong background. And what I did is I actually shared this file, which is a transparent file. I shared this file and I brought it to the computer, and I'm going to show you now the results. So I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to show you what I have in here. So what you can see in here is how I created this vector background, which are these boxes. It's all done in vector format. And then the final piece looks what you can see at the moment on my screen. Okay, so all these gradients and boxes have been created in Illustrator as vectors. And then I brought across my digital script brush lettering and I placed it on top. So this is the first step, using your script lettering as a bitmap image and placing it under a background, and this will be the result. Okay, in this case, I recreated this in Procreate. You could also scan your original and then use it as a bitmap on top. Now, let's go back to the second piece I want to talk about. So the second piece I want to discuss, it's called The Magic Starts from Within. Let me see. And looks like. So the beginning of this piece is exactly the same as the one I just discussed before. So I start with something that looks very static, which is a pencil drawing. Let's go a little bit closer because you cannot see that very clear. It's a very loose pencil sketch. I have memorized already the shapes of Copperplate because I have been practicing Copperplate for a long time. So I use a pencil and I start to decide which letters are going to be where and how am I going to create this piece. So from this very loose sketch, I'm going bigger. And in here, let me zoom out. And in here, you can see that, again, I decided that the letter forms are going to go into a vertical, like the baseline is going upwards. And also the slant, it's going to be slightly off 90 degrees. So once I have this sketch and I go through the same process of enlarging some of these letter forms and trying to create something very unique. And so I'm bringing more dynamism into the piece. Once I have this very loose pencil sketch, then I'm going to go and trace it, and using the same tool, using the Pentel touch, I'm going to do a few variations of this piece until I'm happy. And once it's done, in this case, I'm going to do the approach number 2, the outcome number 2 of my script lettering, which is going to be a vector file. So the vector file that I'm going to create, I'm going to use glyphs, and after that, I'm going to use Illustrator, but you can do it directly with Illustrator. So what I did in this case is I scanned the image, and then I'm going to go into Illustrator and show you the size. Okay, so from here, I'm going to go into Illustrator. Now, the image that you see in front of you at the moment is the same image that I did as a brush lettering, but I have now vectorized everything, and you can see all these points if I zoom in. And you can see how I have redrawn everything, trying to keep the same identity and the same rhythm that I had with my original piece. Now, the difference between the original and the vector format is that I already know the client had chosen a really busy background. So I had to make sure that the themes were thicker, because I knew that there was going to be a lot of noise in the background. Okay, so the background, it's also vector. So now when I activate the layers, you see, you don't see anything anymore because there is a pattern also done in vector format. I'm going to go into the preview mode now, and you can see it together. Okay, because I knew the background is very busy. I knew I had to draw the lettering where the themes had to be thicker. And this is the final poster now with all the information that needed to be included. So this is the outcome number 2. Okay, so we have seen a bitmap example, which is literally scanning your original and that's it. Option 2 is still a bitmap image, but this time you recreated the lettering with Procreate using a digital brush. Number 3, we have this vector outcome, which is, well, in here you didn't see anything, which is by you manually drawing all your anchor points. And the good thing about vector lettering is that you can really print this out in like a 10 meters poster and will still look as crispy as an A3. Like, it doesn't matter the size, it's scalable. So it's very, very good. It depends, depending on the applications that you need. Now, let's do the last one. So let's go back to the table and let's talk about the last piece. So for the last piece, this time, I started again with the same tool. Okay, so this time I wanted to create a self-promotional piece advertising my first calligraphy retreat. And I started again using the Pentel Touch. I decided that I wanted to go upwards, and this time the slant was going to be pretty much like completely upright. So pretty much 90 degrees perpendicular to the baseline. Now, I did that very loosely. Of course, as I mentioned, I already have Copperplate calligraphy knowledge in the background for me as a foundation. So then I'm again trying to create extensions of letter forms. Now, the difference between this piece and the other pieces is that in the other pieces, I'm going to bring the first one again. All the decorative elements have been done only by enlarging and extending some of the letter forms. These are called swashes in typography. In calligraphy, we tend to use the term flourishes for everything, but because typography and typeface design is also my major, I use the same terminology. So when a letter form has been extended, I call these areas a swash. When the decoration is not attached to the letter form anymore, then is when I call that a flourish. And in this case, you can see this element or this element completely detached from the letter form. And this is what I would call a flourish. An ornament completely detached from the letter form. So this piece is the first one that I'm actually working on adding flourishes. Now, once I have this loose sketch, again, I create a guideline for myself to make sure that one, the X height is the same for every line. The space between the lines is also the same. And I'm making sure that the slant, which in this case is upright, is also parallel to everything. So once I have this underneath, then I start working again on this piece. In here, I'm using again pencil. And in here, I'm wondering if the piece is going to work a lot better if I frame the piece within an oval shape. And I'm trying to work on how many iterations, how much is too much, how much is not enough, like all these things. Like it's a very fine balance between too busy or not enough busy that looks unfinished. So there are many, many steps into this pencil sketch. Then at some point, I actually decide to go bigger. And in here, you see I'm using a tracing paper. I don't know if it's clear enough. Let me place one paper underneath and see if it's clear. Probably you don't see it clear enough, but this is using tracing paper and I'm adding more detail. Now, at that time, I felt like I didn't have enough knowledge on flourishes. And so I decided to purchase an online course. It wasn't an online course. It was like, I actually purchased like a workbook that explained a lot of things about flourishes that were very helpful. So I kept going with the process. And then again, I went smaller And I started to add a lot of ornaments that were based on the workbook I was using. And I will give you the details of the workbook on the comments on this video, because it's really good. It's a really good workbook. So, okay, I'm up to here now. So this piece is literally is a literal interpretation of the workbook I was studying. So there is a lot of things going on. So first of all, you can see there is a lot of elements now that are completely detached from the letter forms. So all of these areas are flourishes. I'm trying to fill the entire area to create a circle. So there is a lot of ornament. Also, things I'm doing is that you can see that the thickness of the flourishes and the swashes is exactly the same as the thickness inside the letter forms. So I'm wondering if this is a good idea, because it's pretty hard to read the message because everything has the same hierarchy of importance. Also in here, you can see that this C is completely off slant. Like if I use my pen to see more or less what's the slant of this piece, then suddenly this C is completely in a different angle, in a different slant, okay? So there is a lot of iterations always working on that. So what I'm questioning now, if it's a good idea that the thicks on the decoration are are the same as the thicks on the letter forms. Now the next step is actually removing the thicks on the flourishes. So you can see in here that the letter forms are starting to pop up a little bit more because all the flourishes surrounding are only thin lines, are only a monoline. So there is no contrast anymore. The only contrast is inside the message. Now I'm not too sure anymore. I'm thinking that it might be still not enough contrast between the flourishes and the message. So I decided that maybe I should add a lot more white inside the letter forms. So I tried to create the lettering, but this time doubling up the thickness around the letter forms. And then this is the result. And in here, I can see I can read it a little bit better, definitely, like all the flourishes are thin lines, and the letter forms are really thick. So I can see that these three areas, like the message is now popping up a lot more. As I mentioned, this piece is a literal translation of the workbook I was studying, which is done by Anne-Davnes Elser. And it's a really good workbook. So look at the comments below to find it if you want to keep it, if you want to get it. Now, up to here, what happened was that I felt like this piece was really close to Anne Elser's work, and I felt like it wasn't myself. It was not very representative of what I was looking for. And what I was looking for is something a lot more contemporary. So what I decided is like, I think I want the whole piece done in a monoline, and I'm going to remove some of these flourishes because it's getting too busy for me. So from here, I went back to a much cleaner version. And as you can see, there is no thin and thicks anymore in here. So I have only a monoline. And from here, I decided to go back to the computer. So I'm going to share my screen again. And okay. So we were in here in Illustrator. Now I'm going to be going into the next piece. Okay. So if I show you the preview, you can see that everything in here is only a monoline. I'm going to hide the, there is no thin and thicks anymore. I'm just working with a monoline across everything, everywhere. And then it sort of follows an oval, but it's not so perfect as before. And there is less elements at the moment. Also, I knew I wanted to add a background. So in this case, the background is going to be dark and the lettering is going to be in white color. In here, most of you might have not seen it, but this is glyphs. And this is a software for developing fonts. And if you are going to be drawing a lot of vector shapes, I recommend using a font software for typeface design because it's a lot more advanced. Now, the good thing about using monolines, like in here, so I have a one single stroke for the entire lettering. And in some cases, you might see something in thick, like I'm going to show you now in the other preview. Like in here, you see thin and thick, but this is just done by the type of stroke that I'm using. But the type of drawing I have is only a line. So the good thing about using this type of outcome is that I can run a script in After Effects and I can add animation into it. Okay, so I'm going to show you now the animation I've created using my vector lettering work. This animation, as I mentioned now, is based is using a script run in After Effects, and this is the very good thing about using a monoline and strokes, only strokes, not outlines, to create my piece. This is a second example created in the same way. So I draw this in Illustrator. They are all stroke lines. And this is running After Effects, which is really, really cool. Now, to summarize today's video, let's go back and have a look at the pieces. So outcome number one is a pixel-based image and can be a scan of your brush pen script lettering, or it can be a recreation of your lettering using a digital brush in Procreate. And then the background I'm showing you in here is made in Illustrator in vector format. Example number two is converting your script brush lettering into an outline. And in here, I can modify the thin and thicks. And this was started in Glyphs, which is software to develop fonts. And then I finished that in Illustrator. So in here, we are not talking about single strokes, but outlines. So you can obviously see the thin and thicks. And number three is working with your lettering in vector format, but this time only using stroke lines and then running a script in After Effects to add animation into the piece. So thank you so much. Let me know if this was helpful. Bye.